Welcome back to the Behind the Well Show. Roger Abel. I'm back again with a special guest, Casey Mushrush. He joined us a few weeks ago. He's our local on-staff legal here at Premier. And today we mentioned in the last video that we were going to go ahead and talk about some gifting strategies. And ironically, Casey, I got an email from a foundation that we work with that sent out an email and said, you know, there's still time to leave a good gift for the holidays. So today's show is going to be strictly about gifting. I'm going to let Casey run with most of this. I'm going to guide it kind of where I want to go. But I know personally, this is the time of year I start to get calls. In fact, I had a call last week from a client who said, hey, he's the president of a charitable organization here, and somebody wanted to gift stock. Different company wanted to know how to do it. So all the questions are like, hey, how do I do the gifting right now? And they're going to get really big after the first year again, after people figure out how much their RMDs are. So that's what today's show's about. I hope everybody takes away one way to gift, and maybe we'll kind of debunk some of the myths people have. You know, Casey, I'm going to have you talk about this at some point, but I think you'd agree most people think they're limited to just their annual gift total for the year.
Yep.
Which it doesn't really work that way. So let me kick this off. Other than cash, I have 5 types of different gifting strategies you can utilize, and I'm going to let you run with this first one. What's an IRA rollover gift?
Yeah, so an IRA rollover gift. Another way of terming this, qualified charitable distribution. Now, just a little brief legislative history on this. They used to renew this every single year. And usually it'd be about December 26th, December 27th before we'd see legislation that would actually allow this
for the following year.
For that year. So we had a period of time, about 5 years or so, where we knew that this was a thing and it would probably go through, but we didn't know whether or not people would actually be able to do it right up until the very end of the year. Now, fortunately, with a couple of these different, secure retirement packages and all that thing have gone through, that is now a permanent part in the code where that is now in there. We don't have to worry about, these tax enders and these extenders and all these kinds of things over toward the end of the year to make these, make these qualified. But essentially, what a qualified charitable, the qualified charitable gift or the rollover gift, take money from your IRA, qualified charitable distribution, and send it directly to a charity. Now, this is great from a tax standpoint, okay? When you take money out of your IRA, everybody knows you have required minimum distributions beginning when you hit age 73, some people in the future when they hit age 75. But if you're 73 and above right now for a qualified or for a traditional IRA, you can take that money out that you have to take out, send it over to a charity, and then you don't get taxed on it. So you don't receive the actual funds themselves, or what the benefit of this is, because you never put the money in your pocket. It goes directly over to that entity or over to that charity. Now, one thing, which is kind of interesting, just as far as a little bit of a quirk over in the law, it's not only just the RMD amounts, though. So I said 73 because we're talking about RMDs, and it's way that if you have to pull money out, it can be a tax-efficient method of sending some money. The age is actually 70 and a half. So if you go back to where the required minimum distribution rules actually work, simple IRAs, SEP IRAs are still at 70 and a half. Only traditional IRAs got bumped back to 73. So even if you have a retirement plan, like a SEP IRA or a simple IRA, that you have to take money out for those required minimum distributions at age 70 and a half, not at age 73, you can still utilize this strategy to more efficiently do some gifting or more efficiently get more money over to that charity. So
there's no way. What is there an age limit though?
As far as a max limit or an under limit?
A minimum.
A minimum, yes, 70 and a half.
So it hasn't kept up with the tax code.
Correct.
I think that's important to know because, you're still going to get a deduction if you do this. You can do this at 67. It just doesn't fall under this law, right? So they could still send it, and they get a tax deduction for what they sent.
Yes,
but
correct.
If they're not itemizing and utilizing the standard deduction today, which most people are, they're getting less of a benefit. They're still getting a benefit. It's just less.
Right. It's interesting you say that. I think we've talked about this before in the past. I mean, right now with where the standard deductions are, it's like 90 to 94% of taxpayers are taking the standard deduction and not itemizing. The vast, vast majority of people. So if you have RMDs that you have to take, this can be a way to, and again, I think it pairs very well if you've got somebody who's already doing that gift to charity. If I've got a monthly pledge that I'm doing over to the church, or I've got a monthly pledge going to that 501c3 that I'm sending them money out, we can switch it over and send money out of the IRA account, and then you don't get taxed on that, and then you still get to use the full amount of that standardized deduction. Now, one thing on that too, it doesn't have to be the full amount of the RMD. Okay, there are some limits as far as the amounts that you can do. You can do up to $100,000 a year. Okay, so up to $100,000 can go into that qualified charitable distribution strategy. But you can also do less. So let's say, for example, you've got a required minimum distribution of $5,000 and you're planning on giving $2,500 to charity. Well, you can send the $2,500 from the IRA and then take the other half, put that in your pocket. You get taxed on the $2,500 that you could put in your pocket, and then that other $2,500 goes on a tax-free basis over to that IRA. Now, $5,000 has come out of that account. You've satisfied that RMD. It's just a more efficient manner, or more efficient way of getting assets over to, ultimately what your overall goals are.
Yeah, no, we have lots of clients that do multiple bequests to multiple different places.
Yep.
And most of them aren't like really large. There's a lot of people who are like, I'm going to give $3,000 to my church. I'm going to give $3,000 to YPN. And I'm going to give $3,000 to whatever the Humane Society or whatever their heart desires. So yeah, there's no minimum. We've had people do like $500 even.
Yep.
Right. But they feel good. And it's a good way, like you said, to really work on not gaming the tax code, but utilizing it to your best advantage.
Utilizing it to your best advantage. Absolutely. It's funny because I had a client that asked me one time, they said, man, boy, is that going to create a problem for you guys? I mean, and I just looked at him and said, no, it's going to create a problem for Chase. He's the one that has to do the paperwork.
Well, it's
so
one
why
form.
would you not do it?
So here's the thing that I've found over time is that it's the same families that we help that are making them. And typically it's the same charities, and a lot of times it's the same amount. So once it's on file, it's actually relatively easy to do. There's always something I do tell people if they do this, though. They may not be aware. They should at least inform the charity they're giving the money to that they're sending it to them and how much. Because guess what shows up at most charities? A check for benefit of charity XYZ, and they don't necessarily know who it's from.
Yep.
So if you're going to do this, hey, make sure you let them know that the money's going to come in. A lot of the charitable organizations, they like to know what's coming.
Yep.
Because number one, if they're doing any type of a recognition program, they have the opportunity to recognize you and say, hey, this gift was made to you or made by you to our organization. We will recognize you. So I just think you should let them know if that's coming. I've heard stories of large gifts being left, very large gifts that
they have no idea where it came from.
Well, no, they know in the end where it came from,
right. But it doesn't say on the check is what you're saying.
Well, no, but I'm kind of switching gears here. Individuals who have left $5, $10, $15 million to organizations, but the organizations didn't know in advance. And they didn't really care because they didn't want to like count on the money. But the comment that I've heard was, if we would have known, we would have liked to have recognized them while they were alive versus when they're dead. But some people, guess what? They don't want you to know.
That. Yeah.
They don't want you to know. So I think that's probably the most common gifting, other than just like straight up cash to people, that we get asked a lot about this year. There's another section of gifts that can be highly meaningful for both the organization and the gifter. And that's a gift of securities. Maybe walk us through what that means, Casey, and who it benefits and how it benefits both sides by giving the gift of a security.
Yeah, the gift of securities is another really good way. So keep in mind, let's say, for example, you have an account and maybe you don't have a lot of cash on hand, but you've got an investment account or something like that. So what your plan is I'm going to go sell a position in order to go send this over to a charity. So you're going to be taking a gift and you're going to be pulling it from some sort of an investment account. Well, one thing that you can do rather than selling out of that position is just give a gift of the security itself. Okay, so let's say, for example, if I've got a security, and we're going to get over to the tax thing because all these they go back over to the tax, tax benefits, right? If I paid $100 for that security and it has appreciated, it's doubled in value, now it's worth $200. If I sell that, I pay gain on that difference, right? I've got $100 capital gain on that. Now, whether it's short or long depends on my holding period, but I've got $100 of gain that I will have taxes due. One thing that you can do, though, is rather than sell that position, realize that gain, and then pay taxes on it, give that security directly. Now, the really cool thing on this is whenever you give a gift, and this doesn't matter if it's to a charity or if it's to a individual or anything on that basis actually transfers. You don't realize that that actual transaction, or you don't realize that gain. It just transfers directly over to the other person or over to the other entity.
And then they can sell it.
And then they can sell
keep it or sell it or do what they want
Now,
to do.
charities, actually, there's a really interesting thing on that side, though. They've got a little bit of a special piece for that, right? Because a charity doesn't particularly care what the basis is on that security. When they sell it, it's tax-free anyway, right? That's one of the beauties of that of that arrangement. But when I go and I give that to them, I get to deduct the fair market value, not the basis, the fair market value of that security. So even though I paid $100 and it grew to $200, I gift that security. Now I'm getting my deduction at that $200 level rather than at that $100 level on that security. Now there's some limits as far as your adjusted gross income on the max that you can give, or at least take a deduction at 60% of adjusted gross income.
So I'm going to throw it out here. Let's say you bought a stock, XYZ stock, for $1,000 in 1980, and today it's worth $500,000, because there are stocks that have done that. How much can I gift the whole stock?
Yeah.
And get the deduction?
You can absolutely gift the whole stock.
Are there any limitations
So not on the gift, right?
Okay.
So you can give the full stock, and you get, you maintain that basis, so you don't realize any of that gain, right? So you gift it over with that basis. However, there is a limitation on the amount that you can deduct. So the deduction, 60% of your adjusted gross income. So let's say, for example, you bought that stock at $1,000 and grew to $500,000, and you have a adjusted gross income of $100,000. Well, you still get a $60,000 tax deduction. Now, the other approximately $440,000 of that deduction from the fair market value, that goes away. There is no carry forward or anything on that side. You do get to just give that stock, but you do get that pretty massive deduction based on whatever your adjusted gross income is.
Okay, so that clears it up, because there's one company I can think of that hit a home run like that. Most companies, that's not the case, but there are the situations where people still own that and want to gift that. And, whenever we talk about the gifts of securities, I think it leads into several other types of security gifts. Like one we hear about a lot is a charitable remainder trust. How does a charitable remainder trust work? How does it benefit the person giving the gift? And how does it benefit the actual entity that you're gifting to? Because a lot of people don't realize you can do this. These are a little more advanced, but there's a lot of people that have no idea you can do this.
So, when you start looking at something like a charitable bequest, right, or some sort of a charitable trust, or setting something over on that side. Now, there's really two that I'm going to talk about really, really quickly. There's the one that you mentioned, which is a charitable remainder trust. And then there's one that is basically the opposite of it, which is called a charitable lead trust. Okay? And really what that is it just depends on when do you want to benefit the charity. Okay, so a charitable remainder trust, I make a gift into some sort of a trust arrangement. Okay, I can create income, and I can pull income off of that thing, and then when I pass away, whatever is remaining, that goes on to whatever that charitable entity is.
So let me ask a question here. I have $200,000 of ABC stock that pays a dividend of $20,000 a year. I'm just making it up, right? I gift it. I get to keep the dividend. Is that how it works?
So
you said I get the income. How does that work?
So yes and no. So it depends on the way that you set the income up. So now whether it's a charitable annuity trust or whether it's a unit trust, essentially the IRS has certain tables that based off your age and some other factors over on that side. You can set up and say, I'm going to pull 5% off of this thing for a 20-year period of time, or I'm going to pull X percentage off for this period of time.
I think people miss that, and that's why I asked that question. A lot of people think, well, if it's an S&P 500, it only pays 1.8%.
Yeah.
How much can I get? So I think that's a key detail. You get to name.
Yep.
In the structure of this, how much income you're going to pull from it.
There's a little bit of flexibility over on that side. Now, go to the other side on that too, right? Now, because what you're talking about.
So that benefits a charity when you die.
That benefits a charity when you pass away, right? Or at whatever that end of time frame is. Usually it's when somebody passes away, right? So I move the thing out of my taxable estate, but I'm still receiving some sort of an income coming off the thing. Now the other one, and this is, sometimes I've heard it, termed something like a give it twice trust, right? Let's say that I've got a charity that I want to benefit them, but I don't necessarily want to give them just this big massive, or I don't want to disinherit some children or something like that. So with the charitable lead trust, one of the things that you can actually do is you can set up your charitable trust, make your donation or make that gift into that trust, pay the income out to that charity for a period of time, and then name some other beneficiary over at the end of that. So it is a way to still be able to help out that charity while at the same time, if there's a reason for it or something over on that side that you want to benefit somebody else as well, that you can actually put them as the beneficiaries or the ultimate beneficiaries on that trust, either within that period of time or upon some sort of an event.
On that lead trust where the family inherits the money at death, the charity gets the income, family inherits the money. Stepped up cost basis, is that how that's treated?
So, it's going to depend on the way the trust terms itself is written over inside of there. But, essentially you're transferring your basis over into that trust, and then whatever happens.
So once you transfer it to the trust, it gets a new basis.
So you're transferring it over in there, and then whatever activity inside of that trust is going to determine that.
Okay.
And then later on,
so let me throw it out there.
Basis.
Once again, we bought in 1980 a share of stock for $1,000. It's worth $500,000. We transferred the one share to a
charitable lead trust.
To a lead trust.
Yep.
The new basis of that trust is $500.
The new basis in that
now I know I'm going down a road here.
No. So one of the challenges over on that side, and this also goes back over to that charitable remainder trust too, because what we're actually doing in that particular instance. Now the charitable remainder trust is a little bit easier because essentially it's the taxes coming back over other. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. But on that charitable lead trust, essentially what we're doing in that particular instance is we're basically bifurcating that gift, right? And we are saying part of the gift is owned by the charity and part of the gift is owned by somebody else, but we don't know exactly which part that is going to be. So it's going to depend a lot on what that underlying activity actually happens underneath that trust, whether or not we continue to pass out some of those capital gains distributions, or if we pass out any of those taxable events out to the charity via something like a K-1, and then whatever the basis remaining inside of there, inside that trust, that would actually get transferred over to whoever it is, the new beneficiaries, upon termination of that trust itself. Now, again, that's assuming that it does a distribution in kind. It doesn't sell anything inside of there, because now we're still dealing with something like a trust tax rate, which they go up much more quickly than what individual rates do.
Yeah, so they basically hit like the corporate tax rate at what level? Like
it's like $14,000, $15,000. You're talking like 30. Yeah. It's like, and you're already at 30. Yeah, you're already at 30, upper 30% on your income taxes.
I think you tell most people you want to try to avoid taxes within the trust if you can.
Yeah, if you can pass it out via K-1, that's ideal. And this even goes over to individuals too, but.
To draft those trusts, you need an attorney, right?
I would highly recommend an attorney.
Are there companies out there, though, that you say, hey, I'm assuming that most of these foundations and 501cs have some type of a relationship with someone that will do it in a fairly economic manner for them?
Yeah, most of the foundations and all that, they have, a handful of attorneys that they work with that they will not recommend, so to speak, but they will have a list of people that, hey, by the way, this is somebody that you're going to go talk to, or you want to go make sure you get this thing set up right. When we start looking at some of these more advanced strategies, because they become very highly particularized with the actual individuals themselves, I would be very, very hesitant to be looking at, like a LegalZoom or any of these, document provision services and all that kind of thing. Yeah.
If someone listening needs help with this, contact our office. You can go to btwellshow.com. You can call us at our 800 number, which is at btwellshow.com, because we can get you in touch with the right person or us to help kind of guide where this needs to go if this is something that you're interested in. If you want to gift stocks or securities, there's ways to do it. Let's just make sure we do it in concert with your values, in concert with the foundation's values, and make sure we do it correctly and legally.
Yeah, well, I think that's a really interesting thing that you say there, and I think that's really important, is, usually when we're having a conversation around this stuff, there's a purpose, right? There's actually a point to it. And what I mean by that is somebody somewhere along the way has been relatively successful, or they're looking for some way to give back into a community or into some sort of a situation. But what they're trying to do is also do it in a way that doesn't just absolutely shellac them when it comes over to the tax side. Now that's not the end all be all, right? At the end of the day, we want to do it in the wisest way that we possibly can. We want to maximize that overall gift that to the either to the entities, or if we've got some other sort of remainder individual or something like that, we do want to make sure that we can maximize those gifts. But it also does need to be, as you mentioned, in accordance with what it is that you're actually trying to create, right? And that's where all these things, and again, I don't think any of them are necessarily there's not one individual strategy that's going to work for everyone. It might be a combination of these things that actually ends up being implemented. These things that we're talking about right now, a little bit more complex, a little bit more complicated. Not everybody's going to need to go down that route, but when they work really, really well.
Yeah. And I think the thing to realize is if this is something you're interested in, don't let it paralyze you from doing it. Just go find the people that can help you execute it, because there are people out there that do this, and they do a lot of it, and they know how to get it done correctly. So, Casey, I'm looking at my list, and so far I've hit IRA rollover gift, gift to securities, charitable bequest, and the life income gift. We've hit those. The last one on my list, until we get to the grand finale here, is a life insurance gift. Tell me how people can gift life insurance or life insurance cash values to foundations and how it benefits them.
Yeah, so life insurance gifts are relatively easy to do, and there's a couple of ways that this can be done. So you can either, as you just said, you can give the cash value itself. Now, essentially, all that means is I'm going to turn over the ownership of this policy over to the foundation or over to the charity, right? So I signed some forms over on that side. I'm no longer the owner. Now, whoever I signed it over to, in this particular instance, that charity, the charity now becomes the owner. Now they get to do with it whatever they want. Usually they're going to cash it out, right? Because they're looking for that cash value, or they're trying to take those funds and maybe turn that into something a little bit more immediate. Now, another way, let's say that it's, for example, I've got all the other legacy pieces put together, and I have this old policy. Maybe it's a paid-up life insurance policy, so there's no premiums due or anything on that. Well, I could simply leave the charity as the beneficiary on that policy itself. Okay, and then when I pass away, whatever that death benefit on that policy is, that goes directly over to the charity. Now, they don't pay any income tax on it because they're a charity, nor does anybody pay any income tax on those. But that is a way for us to, maybe take an old policy that maybe it's not necessary or maybe it's not needed for the overall financial plan, and we can get it over there and actually benefit, maybe somebody else with something that's already put over in place. Now, one thing a little bit more complicated on that side. Let's say, for example, if I'm trying to remove, or I want to get that out of my estate, right? I don't want the life insurance proceeds. Maybe I've got like a $10 million life insurance policy, and I don't want those proceeds to be included in my estate when I pass away.
Because if it is, they become federal estate tax.
Now we got federal estate tax that we got to deal with.
And here's what I'm going to tell people listening, especially if you're not living in the world of estate taxes. Mm-hmm. The vast majority of life insurance agents out there are going to tell you this is tax-free.
Yep.
And it is federally income tax-free.
Yep.
It's not necessarily estate tax-free. I think people need to be highly aware of that.
Yeah, it just depends on whether or not it's going to be included inside that gross estate. Now, there are some ways that we can take that life insurance policy and get it out of our gross estate. And one way of doing that, surprise, surprise, we're coming back to trusts. We can set up an irrevocable life insurance trust, transfer the ownership of that policy into the trust. Well, now the trust is the owner. I no longer own it anymore, so it doesn't become part of my estate as long as I survive for another 3 years.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So when you gift that, if the value of that policy is $1 million, like the cash value,
yep,
or the money you're putting in is $1 million.
Yep.
The total cost you have in this thing. That gets taken off of your lifetime exclusion when you gift it, correct?
Yes, correct.
Is there a way to gift it directly to the charity and avoid that coming off of your lifetime gift?
I mean, you could just assign them ownership of the policy. Again, that's going to depend on whether or not they're going to want to continue paying those premiums.
But arguably, if you have a large estate, it may be more worthwhile to do that. Just give them the ownership, especially if it's paid up. I'm just saying you have a paid up.
Yeah, like a paid up policy.
You got a paid up
absolutely.
policy. And
If there's no premiums due or anything on that, if there's premium payments that are due, I mean, realistically,
they're not going
to. Well, they're either not going to be able to afford it, or they're just going to cash it out because they look at it and say, you know what, we don't know when we're going to receive that death benefit, and if we're paying $10,000, $20,000 a year in premiums, they're not going to do that in order to have whatever that death benefit is.
But an individual could set up and make that gift every year for $20,000
Sure, they could.
to pay that
Sure.
too. I'm just figuring. I'm thinking, how do I get it completely out of my estate, the most tax benefit for me as an individual or family, and the most bang for the buck for the organization I'm giving this thing to.
Yep.
I guess in essence, how do I keep Uncle Sam out of the most?
Yeah, I mean, and again, I think that depends a little bit upon the individual set of circumstances as well. You did actually mention something that I do think is a good idea on that. Maybe instead of paying the policy premiums, or maybe I'm not going to pay the policy premiums, maybe I just make a gift to that charity and I say, hey, by the way, I'm going to give you this policy. It costs $10,000 a year, and I'm going to pledge you $10,000 a year as long as I'm around right now. Now that keeps underneath, everything from a tracking standpoint and all that that could be very, very beneficial.
Limit. It's just
Absolutely.
$17,000 per person per beneficiary.
Well, not to a charity. I mean, there's nothing over on that side. It doesn't even matter.
I guess you're right.
But there's I think there's a lot of ways that this thing actually could get set up depending on what we're trying to accomplish.
And it's a cool way because a lot of people that hit a mass affluency, they get to a point where they're just
consider this, right? And maybe this is where we start to combine some of these things. Well, maybe I've got that policy that I'm paying $10,000 on, and then I've got about $10,000 a year in RMDs. Now all of a sudden I can do that gift over on that side, and oh, by the way, I can do a qualified charitable distribution, $10,000 a year, and keep that off my tax bill as well. And now we're starting to see where some of these strategies can really come together. I mean, you talk about making an impact on that family situation and making a huge impact for that charity.
Right.
That's the way. That's some interesting things there.
I mean, in this is why people come work with us, is to try to get creative strategies to accomplish their goals. And it's not just for charitable giving. It's the same kind of stuff we do when we're trying to create income for people. And I'm gonna let kind of Casey close this show out with the last charitable thing, we'll call it, that I get asked about a lot. And it's called a donor advised fund. Why don't you tell everybody what a donor advised fund is, how it works?
Yeah, so
because a lot of people have heard of donor advised fund, and I think when you hear that, they're like, you have to have so much money to do this.
Yep.
And that's not necessarily the case, right?
I mean, the easiest way I think to describe a donor advised fund is it's a simple foundation, or like a simple family foundation, except we're not going through the process of setting up our own individual foundation. So essentially what a donor advised fund is we can set up an account or set up some sort of a charitable gifting strategy that can send money from that account over to all of these charities. I can make my donation over to that donor advised funds, get a tax deduction over on it, but then I can still very strongly suggest, where those donations are actually going to go to. So take, for example, we set up an account over at investment company and we put $25,000 into it. And then I say to that company, I want $5,000 to go to charity A and I want $5,000 to go to charity B. Now, legally speaking, investment company does not have to send that money over to charity A and charity B. They could go send it to charity C if they want to. Now, that being said, if they did that, do you think that individual is ever going to give that company any more money? No, absolutely not. So it is a way for us to make a contribution over to what amounts to effectively some sort of a foundation arrangement without having to go through all the legal stuff from a setup standpoint, and be able to make those or direct those gifts to an extent or significantly influence where they're ultimately going to end up going to. Now, the interesting thing over on this is that is not, we were talking about qualified charitable distributions or QCDs. Those are age banded, right? We got to be 70 and a half in order to actually make those. With the donor advised fund, there's no limit on that. So I don't have an age limit with the donor advised fund as far as actually setting those up. All we really need is we need to know, do you have a charity that you want to benefit, and are you intending on making some sort of a lump sum contribution? And maybe you don't even necessarily know where you want it to go to. You just know that you want to put some money over into the place, and maybe we can also use it as a way to be a little bit more effective from a tax code perspective. Now, let's take an example over on that side. Let's say, for example, I make $200,000 a year, and I don't know where it's going to go. Maybe it's a church, maybe it's to animal shelter or something like that as a qualified as a 501c3. But I know that I'm going to give away $20,000 a year, right? Well, if we know that our standard deduction right now is $25,000, I could do $20,000 each year. I don't get any benefit for that, right? I take the standard deduction. Nothing actually goes over from an itemized standpoint. With what the donor advised fund can allow us to do is we can do something called bunching. Well, maybe instead of doing $20,000 in year one, I take my standard deduction of $25,000, and then in year two I do $40,000 over into that donor advised fund. And then I can still set up, maybe it's a monthly, maybe it's an annual distribution or something like that to benefit these overall charities. But what I've done is I've taken that amount that would not qualify me, I'd still be underneath that standard deduction. And now I might be able to actually itemize and be a little bit more tax advantaged because I've taken 2 tax years of charitable donations, stuck it over into one, and then the next year, guess what? I'm just back underneath my standard deduction again.
That's been, ever since the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, that's been a much more popular way to give larger gifts because it's more impactful to the donor in that situation, which we might see that all change come 2026 when this tax code expires, which is another great reason why having a good financial advisor and a firm that kind of has a beat on what's going on with this. And it's great to have Casey in our office because he knows what's going on, and we're fortunate. There's not a lot of financial firms out there that have an on-staff person in the legal world. Per se. I mean, there's not that many. We have them right down the door.
A handful.
If anybody's looking for help, go to btwellshow.com. Feel free to follow us on social, Facebook, LinkedIn, X. And if you're watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button.